Ladies and gentlemen, presenting to you Civil Aviation Minister Jyotiraditya Scindia. Big round of applause for Mr. Jyotiraditya Scindia for gracing the India Economic Conclave. Mr. Jyotiraditya Scindia, 9 years, a lot has been achieved. Are you totally satisfied with the sector that you head in terms of the strides that have been made, 43% passenger traffic above last year's level? Do you think you thought about this happening in the manner it has? And do you think this is going to continue, the growth story in the aviation sector?
So Navika, first of all, thank you very much for having me, and it's always a pleasure to be at this conference, to be hosted by Navika, and to hope against hope that she doesn't grill you, but nevertheless. Let me say this, that the transportation sector in India has gone through a huge change over the last 9 years. I think you are sitting on the cusp, even with this growth, of a revolution. And that the underpinning of that, Navika, if I may, are based upon 4 fundamental precepts that have transformed India in the last 9 years under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi. The first, of course, is the fact that India today is the only bright, shining star on the economic paradigm across the world, growing at 6.1% on a compounded annual growth rate basis. And don't forget that the magic in an economic story lies not necessarily in blips of economic growth of 10% or 9% or 8%, but really a CAGR of upwards of 5.5% that transforms lives across the world. And same has been the story in the US, a country that one looks at in terms of its economic strength. The US grew at 2%, but it grew at 2% for 100 years. And that's what transformed the US's story. So the first is economic growth. The second is the increasing urbanization that's happening in India. India over the last 9 years has today grown to roughly about 34% of our population living in urban agglomerates. And that number is only going to grow by the year 2030 to close to about 40%. That brings with it a tremendous amount of latent demand. Third is the increasing disposable income among all our people across the length and breadth of India. And finally, the fourth, which I believe is one of the most important factors, is the aspirations of us as Indians has really reached new heights. So I think these 4 fundamental precepts are bringing about a fundamental transformation in the way the transportation sector is changing. Civil aviation. 2013-14, we transported roughly about 6 crore passengers domestically. Last year, we transported close to about 14.5 crore passengers domestically. So the sector itself has doubled, or more than doubled, in the last 9 years. And if you ask me honestly, number for 2030, I'm looking at this sector going from 14.5 crore passengers to close to 45 crore passengers. So that's the kind of growth numbers that you're looking at in the next 7 to 8 years, with the tremendous amount and desire for people to travel. Underpinning of that is a change in the way we are rolling out the sector. India built 74 airports from independence till 2013. That's roughly about 66 years. 2014, 67 years. And in the last 9 years, we have built 74 airports, heliports, and waterdromes, doubled that number to 148. So what India managed to do in 67 years, we have done in the last 9 years. But the journey has just started. And through this conference, I'd like to inform our viewers as well, we've pegged the number really high over the next 4 years. We plan to take this number from 148 to upwards of 200 airports, waterdromes, and heliports in India over the next 4 to 5 years. So that's the kind of potential that we're looking at going forward, both in terms of passenger traffic and in terms of infrastructure.
Mr. Scindia, you made a statement that you have a massive game plan coming up for the aviation sector. Since you made that remark, people have stopped breathing. They're waiting for you to unveil the massive game plan. On the India Economic Conclave, would you want our audiences to know what that massive game plan is all about?
So that's a good follow-up question, because once you define your mission and the growth drivers and demand, then the next plausible question is how are you going to make sure that you're able to service that demand? And I'm in a service industry, I'm in a service business. And therefore, the two fundamental, again, precepts based with that, if you look at airports, when I talk about the fact that we're going to grow from 148 to almost 200, 220 airports over the next 4 to 5 years, we have close to a 98,000 crore capex plan in place for the next 3 to 4 years. That is going to be driven not only by the private sector, but it's going to be driven by the private sector and the public sector through Airports Authority of India. Airports Authority of India will roughly do a capex between 32 to 34,000 crores out of those 98,000 crores, which will cover 42 greenfield airports and 42 brownfield airports and 3 greenfield airports, of which one we've already built in Hollongi in Arunachal Pradesh at a cost of roughly about 750 crores. The private sector, through that the capex number that I just talked about, roughly about 60,000 crores odd, will expand capacity in 4 brownfield airports and build out an additional 3 greenfield airports. So that being the plan from a macro perspective, civil aviation has always worked on a hub and spoke policy. So when you look at both the hubs and the spokes, we've got 6 metros in our country. Our current throughput capacity in our 6 metros, which is Bombay, Delhi, Kolkata, Hyderabad, Bengaluru, Chennai, those 6 metros is roughly about 220 million throughput on an annual basis. In the next 3 to 4 years, that throughput on these 6 airports, including Jewar and Navi Mumbai, which are coming up, will go to a 425 million. So those are the numbers that we're talking about. Delhi Airport today services roughly about 70 million passengers. We're going to grow that number to 109 million by the end of this year with a new 4th terminal and a new runway. It's going to become one of the largest airports in the world today, even beyond Atlanta. That's the kind of scale that civil aviation is going to grow at. When you look at aircrafts, because you've got to have aircrafts that when you're expanding airport capacity, we had roughly about 400 aircrafts in 2013-14. We've grown that fleet by almost 75% to 700 aircraft. And my rough back-of-the-envelope number for the next 5 to 7 years is this 700 should easily go to 1,200 or 1,400. So you're going to have a huge increase in your fleet capacity. And mind you, when I talk about fleet capacity and I talk about airports, we're not only talking about big cities, tier 1 cities in India. It's our initiative to take civil aviation to tier 2 and tier 3 cities. Last mile connectivity for me is extremely important.
Mr. Scindia, let me now ask a Aam Aadmi question. And we have a viewer who has sent us a question who says that Delhi to Leh tickets today cost 52,000 rupees and Delhi to Paris 56,000 rupees. Now, do you think there's any comparison between the ticket prices, especially to some of these routes, which are skyrocketing all the time, and passengers in low-cost airlines, so-called low-cost airlines, have to shell out a huge sum?
So first, let me add a caveat and say that civil aviation is a deregulated sector, okay? And the last thing that Navika, you I'm sure would be auguring for is to start regulating a deregulated sector, because then for all the years that you've been in this business, you'll be going in reverse gear from what you've been advocating throughout your career. But that being said, I think still
Maybe the regulator needs a nudge?
Sorry?
Is the regulator looking at these prices? Do they need a nudge? Because these are questions people are asking.
Correct. So the point that I was trying to make to you, and I'm going to try and make that point once again, is that we are a deregulated sector, right? In 1993, in fact, my father brought in open sky policy, as you well recall, and we deregulated the civil aviation sector. So there is no regulator for pricing of fares. But having said that, I think it's important to understand the dynamics across which this industry works. And there are two dynamics that are in play today. One, very clearly, the civil aviation sector and the industry is a seasonal industry. So you have high points which start in festive season in October. So October through Jan is high season for this industry. Then you go into a lull starting Jan until April, May, when the summer season kicks in and holidays and sort of starts, which is what we're going through right now. And therefore you have high demand that steps in again, which then peters off prior to monsoon. So A, we are a seasonal industry, and therefore there are crests and troughs from a demand point of view. B, we've had a unusual situation and an unusual crisis that we've had to deal with. The sector that you've talked about, and very rightfully so, used to be serviced by Go First. And the very fact that Go First has applied at to NLCT and has going through its restructuring, which means that there's been a pullback from the 315 odd routes that they were applying, has meant that there has been an excess demand on the routes that they were applying. Now, we've given additional routes to other airlines, but it's a very piquant situation, if I may use that word, because I doubt whether any sector has kind of seen the vicissitudes that civil aviation has seen over the last 3 years. 3 years ago, you had a time when all your planes were sitting on the ground and there was not a single passenger for any one of these aircraft. And today, we have all our aircraft up in the air, but we don't have enough aircraft to service the demand. And the reason why we don't have enough aircraft is because the main suppliers of aircraft across the world, whether it's Airbus or it's Boeing or engine suppliers, Pratt & Whitney, all have supply chain issues. And therefore, they're not able to service in terms of the demand that is out there. Now, one of the main reasons that we have this kind of piquant situation is also because of a supply chain issue with regard to Pratt & Whitney. But having said that, I have put together a group as we speak in the last couple of days. We are doing our analysis in-house on a lot of these routes. One of the two airports that have been, or two destinations, if you will, that have been affected the most by this unusual event is one, Srinagar, and the second is Pune, slightly Ahmedabad. And we're doing a full analysis on this. And we will speak to our airlines to make sure that fares are within a certain level, and we will try our best. But it's a issue that has been created due to an unforeseen demand-supply imbalance, which was not the case last year.
Election season around the corner. Are you a contender for the Madhya Pradesh Chief Minister's top job? Hand on your heart.
Navika has, in the 23 odd years that I have known her, has repeatedly asked me this question, and I don't know when I'm going to be able to satisfy her.
You can't, because you left a certain party to join the BJP because last time around they didn't keep up their promises to
Not
you.
at all. I'm so surprised and shocked to hear you make that statement. Let me be very clear, Navika. You've known my father. I don't know whether you knew my grandmother or not, but whether it's my grandmother, my father, and I have the same blood, this is not a family that has ever in its history been after post or position. Ever. My father, when that airplane crash happened, he was the first person to go in and resign. When the Madhya Pradesh results came out, and we had a conversation, we had a discussion, and the choice was made that Navika is going to become the Chief Minister of Madhya Pradesh? I said, absolutely, and I will support her completely. And I immediately went and made an announcement. My move from the Congress was not because of post, was not because of position. My move from the Congress was because the Congress party did not keep my self-respect. When I was humiliated and insulted by the Chief Minister in his chair, and I only asked for my self-respect. I did not ask for a position, I did not ask for a post, and I certainly didn't ask for this. But one thing I will not compromise with in my life, and that is with my self-respect. And I think that is the most important tenet for anyone sitting in this room.
Absolutely.
And so to answer your question, my race and my thirst is not for a chair. My life is about service. My life is not about politics. My pursuit is not politics. My pursuit is to make sure that Jan Seva is done. My father used to say a line, Navika, and it never made sense to me till he passed away. He said, जिंदगी में कभी भी लक्ष्य राजनीति नहीं होनी चाहिए, लक्ष्य जनसेवा होना चाहिए, और राजनीति केवल एक माध्यम होनी चाहिए उस लक्ष्य की पूर्ति करने के लिए, उससे ज्यादा नहीं. That's the spirit with which I carry on my life.
Big round of applause.
Thank you very much for having me.